The house looked exactly as I'd imagined it, looming at the end of a winding dirt road, its old stone walls blanketed in moss and ivy. Shadows from the dense forest surrounded it, making the place feel isolated, like it was a world unto itself. I hadn't known my great-grandfather well, but somehow, this place seemed to hold the same cold presence I remembered in him, distant and reserved, as though it had been left here untouched, locked away along with his secrets. I stepped out of my car, the chill of early autumn prickling my skin, and took in the surroundings. The house was larger than I expected, with thick stone walls, tall narrow windows, and a steep, shingled roof. As I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, the stale air wrapped around me, filled with the smell of dust and age. The interior was dimly lit, the light struggling through the dirty windows, but I could see the ornate woodwork and the faded wallpaper, both worn by time. It was as if the house had been preserved in its own past, untouched by the outside world. Setting my bags down in the entryway, I began exploring. Each room seemed filled with reminders of a different era. Thick carpets, heavy drapes, bookshelves crammed with old leather-bound volumes. There was something unsettling about the silence that hung in the air, a weight that pressed down on me with every step. At the end of the hallway, I noticed a room that was locked. I tried the handle again, but it wouldn't budge. Something about that door piqued my curiosity, but I decided I'd deal with it later. Turning back, I continued my exploration, my footsteps echoing faintly through the empty halls. Eventually, I found myself in what must have been the main bedroom. The walls were lined with dark wood panels, and an antique dresser stood against one wall, covered with a thin layer of dust. But what caught my attention immediately was the large mirror in the corner of the room. It was framed in a heavy, ornate design, dark wood with intricate carvings twisting along the edges. Despite the age of everything else in the house, the mirror's glass looked untouched, pristine. I don't know why, but as I looked at my reflection, I felt a chill pass over me. There was nothing unusual about what I saw, just me, tired and rumpled from the drive. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror was hiding something, that maybe if I looked closely enough, I'd see something more than just myself. Brushing off the strange feeling, I moved on, yet I kept finding myself glancing back at the mirror, as though it were watching me. I finally forced myself to leave the room, shutting the door a bit too quickly behind me, and continued exploring the house. As evening settled, I returned to the room where the locked door stood, unable to shake my curiosity. After a bit of searching, I found a set of keys in a drawer, hoping one of them would fit. With a satisfying click, the lock turned, and I pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit, and the air felt even colder here, as though it had been closed off for decades. It was small, almost like a study, with a large wooden desk and shelves lined with thick books. On the desk, I found a stack of old papers and, underneath them, a worn leather-bound book. It looked like a journal. Curiosity piqued. I opened the journal, flipping through pages filled with tight, slanted handwriting. Each entry was dated, and I realized with a jolt that this had belonged to my great-grandfather. I skimmed the first few pages, finding notes about the property, comments on the weather, and occasional mentions of the family. But as I continued, the tone shifted. One entry stood out to me immediately. The mirror has served as a faithful conduit. It reveals much, though not to all. Only those of blood will see what lies within, the reflection of the past, a reminder of what must be upheld. I stared at the words, feeling a cold sweat break out along my neck. Conduit? What was he talking about? And why had he mentioned only those of blood? I flipped through more pages, finding similar entries, cryptic notes about traditions and promises. Each line hinted at something hidden, a ritual or practice that had been passed down within our family, though he never explained it fully. But the mirror, he returned to the mirror over and over, writing about it with reverence and, oddly, with caution. I closed the journal, the weight of its words pressing down on me. Suddenly, I felt that chill again, the same one I'd felt in front of the mirror upstairs, as though something unseen was watching me, waiting. Taking the journal with me, I left the room and locked the door behind me, feeling a strange sense of relief once it was closed. I returned to the bedroom, the mirror looming in the corner, my own reflection staring back at me. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this place, more to my family's past, than I'd ever imagined. And as sleep overtook me, I dreamed of the mirror, its surface shifting, my reflection twisting into something I couldn't recognize. It was just the beginning, and deep down, I knew I'd stepped into something I couldn't ignore. The morning light did little to ease the tension that had settled over me. My dreams had been restless, filled with flashes of distorted reflections, and a feeling of being pulled towards something I couldn't see. I tried to shake off the unease, but it clung to me as I sat down with a cup of coffee, the leather-bound journal resting on the table in front of me. The memory of the entries I'd skimmed the night before filled me with a mixture of dread and curiosity. I opened the journal to the first few pages, hoping for some clarity. Most of the early entries were routine, daily observations about the property and the family's affairs, written in my great-grandfather's tight, meticulous handwriting. But as I turned each page, his tone shifted, as if the journal had gone from being a simple record to something far more personal and more secretive. One entry, dated many years before I was born, caught my attention. I have honored the pact as was required. The mirror serves as the link, the doorway through which they are seen. It is a bond that cannot be broken, and those who bear our blood will see their faces. A chill ran through me. I had no idea what he meant by the pact or who they were, but the way he wrote about it, almost reverently, yet with an edge of fear, left me uneasy. I'd heard of people using mirrors in folklore, connecting with spirits or seeing visions, but I never imagined my own family had practiced something like this. Flipping through more entries, I began to piece together fragments of his intentions. The mirror, it seemed, wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was an object of ritual, a conduit, as he'd written, used to maintain some kind of agreement. Each generation was apparently bound to honor this pact, and the mirror acted as a link to something. But he never specified what, or who, might lie beyond that link. Another entry described the mirror in more detail. Those who look carefully enough will see more than their reflection. The faces of those affected, those who were taken, appear on the other side, a reminder of the price that must be paid. The word sent a jolt through me. Faces of those who were taken? My mind raced, wondering who these people were and what they'd been sacrificed for. I remembered the faint shapes I thought I'd seen in the mirror yesterday, dismissed as a trick of the light. But what if it had been something more? I read on, finding more references to the chosen and to the reflections he'd seen within the mirror's depths. He wrote of rituals held at night, ceremonies involving certain items meant to reinforce the pact. The journal didn't spell out exactly what these rituals entailed, but he mentioned that they were required regularly to maintain the family's prosperity. One entry, dated a few years before he died, was particularly haunting. The mirror reveals their faces more clearly with each passing year. I see them staring back at me, as though waiting, as though demanding something in return. I fear that when my time comes, they will welcome me on the other side. Yet I know that those of blood will continue the watch, as is our duty. I shuddered, imagining my great-grandfather peering into the mirror, seeing these faces looking back at him. It was almost as if he were watching over souls that had been trapped there, souls that he was somehow responsible for. The more I read, the more I felt the weight of his choices, the legacy he'd left behind without ever explaining it to his descendants. Setting the journal aside, I stood up and made my way to the bedroom, where the mirror waited in the corner. I felt drawn to it, even as part of me wanted to avoid it entirely. When I stood in front of it, I saw only my own reflection, tired and slightly pale from lack of sleep. But as I stared, I thought I caught a glimpse of something else, a faint outline, a shadowy figure behind my shoulder, just beyond the glass. I turned around, but of course there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone, leaving only my own reflection staring back at me. Despite my rational side insisting it was nothing, the sensation lingered, that odd feeling of being watched. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, there was something or someone inside the mirror waiting for me to look deeper, waiting for me to see them. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I tried to focus on organizing the house, but my mind kept returning to the journal, to the faces my great-grandfather claimed to have seen. I found myself replaying his words, wondering who these people were and why they were so connected to the mirror. That night, unable to resist the pull, I returned to the bedroom once more. The mirror stood in the corner, silent and still, its surface dark in the dim light. I sat down in front of it, feeling a strange sense of anticipation. I leaned forward, staring into my own eyes, daring myself to see beyond my reflection. And as I looked, the faint outline of a face began to take shape, a face that wasn't mine. It was hazy at first, barely visible, but gradually it became clearer, a pair of hollow eyes staring back at me, lips parted as if trying to speak. My heart raced, a wave of terror and curiosity washing over me. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the face faded, leaving me alone with my own reflection. Breathing hard, I backed away from the mirror, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Was it real, or just my imagination? But I couldn't deny the feeling I'd had, the cold certainty that I wasn't alone in that room. Whatever secrets my great-grandfather had hidden in this house, I was beginning to realize they were far darker and far more dangerous than I'd anticipated. As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I knew one thing for certain. The mirror held more than memories. It held a legacy, a pact, and the faces of those who had paid the price for it. And somehow, I was now part of it. The following morning, the house felt different, like it was holding its breath. I woke up with a sense of purpose, the fear of last night overshadowed by a gnawing curiosity. I needed to understand what was happening, what my great-grandfather had left behind, and what the mirror truly was. It had shown me something, a face, a presence that felt trapped, waiting. And I had the unsettling feeling that there was more for me to find. I spent hours searching the house, combing through drawers, cabinets, and every hidden corner I could reach. The journal had mentioned the mirror as a conduit for the pact, but I didn't understand how. The faces, the glimpses I'd seen, they couldn't just be coincidences. It was as if the mirror were somehow linked to those who had been affected by my family's choices, their lives intertwined with this strange relic in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. Finally, in one of the guest bedrooms tucked away on the second floor, I found something. Behind an old cabinet was a loose panel in the wall. My pulse quickened as I pried it open, revealing a small compartment that had clearly been hidden for decades. Inside, I found a box, a small, heavy chest lined with faded fabric and dust. I set it on the bed, my fingers trembling as I opened it. Inside were items that seemed oddly personal, a few pieces of jewelry, a torn photograph, a locket. As I picked each item up, I felt a strange chill, like each one carried a fragment of someone's memory. It was as if they had belonged to people who were now gone. Beneath the trinkets was a bundle of letters, tied together with a frayed black ribbon. I carefully untied it, unfolding the first letter, dated over 70 years ago. My great-grandfather's handwriting filled the page, the familiar tight scrawl recounting a strange message. Each chosen one leaves a mark, a memory held within the mirror. These items are reminders of those who paid the price, their lives preserved in reflection, their voices silenced in exchange for prosperity. I felt a pang of dread as I read his words. These weren't just items. They were mementos, keepsakes of people who had somehow been sacrificed, their presence absorbed into the mirror as part of some twisted exchange. My great-grandfather's words hinted at a terrible truth. The mirror didn't just reflect, it retained. The faces I'd seen, the eerie glimpses of people who were no longer alive, were remnants of those whose lives had been consumed by this pact. I glanced at the items scattered across the bed, feeling the weight of their significance. The people they had belonged to hadn't simply disappeared. They had been sacrificed, taken by the mirror as part of some agreement that my family had upheld. And I was now entangled in it, just by inheriting this place. Returning to the bedroom, I faced the mirror once again, feeling both fear and determination. I stepped closer, staring into its depths, daring myself to look beyond my reflection. The room was silent, the air thick and still, and slowly, shadows began to form in the glass. This time, the faces were clearer. A woman, her expression pained, her eyes hollow. A young man, his face streaked with something dark, his eyes filled with anger. Another face appeared, and another, each one hauntingly vivid, each one looking at me as if they knew I was watching. I felt a wave of nausea, a mix of horror and helplessness. These people had been trapped, their lives taken and bound to this mirror, their souls unable to rest. I backed away, the realization crashing over me. My family's prosperity, their influence, all of it had been built on this dark ritual, on sacrifices that had condemned innocent people to be bound to this mirror. The journal entries, the trinkets, the faces, they all pointed to the same horrific truth. But why? Why will my family do this? And who were these people, the ones trapped within the mirror? As I struggled to piece everything together, I remembered one last line from my great-grandfather's journal. The chosen one bears the burden, and only blood can set them free. The words reverberated in my mind, chilling me to the core. Only blood could set them free. Did that mean I was responsible for breaking the pact? Was I the one meant to finally release them? The weight of the legacy, of the generations that had upheld this curse, settled heavily on my shoulders. My family had bound these people here, and I was the only one left who could release them. But I knew that breaking such a pact wouldn't come without consequences. The power that my family had gained, the success they'd reaped from this dark bargain, it would all unravel, and I would be left to face the cost. I returned the trinkets and letters to the box, my hands trembling. I had a decision to make, one that would either free these trapped souls or continue the cycle of secrecy and horror that my family had built. As I glanced back at the mirror, the faces were gone, but I knew they were still there, waiting for me to decide. That night, the house felt colder than ever. Shadows clung to every corner, and the silence pressed in on me, as if the very walls were listening, waiting. I lay awake, torn between duty and fear, the faces of those lost haunting me, urging me to set them free. But deep down, I knew that if I chose to release them, I might lose everything my family had built, and possibly myself along with it. That night, the house felt more alive and more haunted than ever. I lay in bed, staring up at the dark ceiling, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. My great-grandfather's journal had made it clear that I was the one meant to continue the family's pact, to honor the twisted agreement that had kept their fortune alive. But I couldn't imagine living with myself if I chose to uphold something that had sacrificed so many lives. I drifted in and out of a restless sleep, my dreams plagued by visions of the mirror and the faces that lay within it. I saw my great-grandfather standing in front of the mirror, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see, his expression grim and resolute. And then I saw others, figures I didn't recognize, members of my family who had lived long before me, each one staring into the mirror with the same haunted look, bound to the ritual that had kept our family's prosperity intact. The visions grew darker, and soon, I saw the faces of the trapped souls, the people who had been sacrificed to this pact. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths open as if crying out, but no sound came. It was as though they were locked in a silent scream, a plea for release. I woke up gasping, the weight of their despair pressing down on me like a physical force. Unable to shake the horror, I got up, drawn to the mirror once more. I made my way through the dark house, every creak and whisper seeming louder, heavier. When I reached the bedroom, the mirror loomed in the corner, its surface reflecting only shadows in the dim light. I took a deep breath and stepped closer, determined to face whatever lay within. As I stared into the mirror, the faces began to materialize again, one by one. They were clearer this time, their expressions filled with pain and anger. Each face seemed to hold a story, a life cut short, and I could feel their emotions radiating through the glass, a mixture of sorrow, fury, and a desperate longing for freedom. The more I looked, the more I felt their presence seeping into the room, as if the boundary between the mirror and reality were beginning to dissolve. I could almost hear whispers, faint voices reaching out to me, begging me to end their torment. They wanted freedom, and I was the only one who could give it to them. Summoning my courage, I spoke, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know you're here. I know what my family did. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." For a moment, The faces seemed to soften, their expressions shifting from anger to something else. Hope, maybe. But then I felt a sudden chill, a shift in the air, and the mirror's surface began to ripple, like water disturbed by an unseen hand. I stumbled back, watching in horror as one of the figures seemed to step forward, its face almost merging with my reflection. It was as if they were trying to reach out, to cross the boundary that held them back. My pulse raced, and I felt a wave of terror, but something kept me rooted in place. I could feel their desperation, their need for release, and I knew that breaking the mirror might be the only way to set them free. But I also knew it would sever the pact, undoing everything my family had built. Taking a deep breath, I looked back at my own reflection, my face pale and drawn. I had to make a choice. I could honor the pact, continue the legacy, and keep the souls trapped forever, or I could shatter it, release them, and let go of everything my family had gained. I felt a strange calm settle over me. I knew what I had to do. I left the room and went to the garage, searching through old tools until I found a sledgehammer. Its weight felt reassuring in my hands as I returned to the bedroom, the mirror reflecting my determined expression as I stood before it one last time. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the faces trapped within. "I won't let this continue." And with that, I lifted the sledgehammer and brought it down with all my strength. The impact shattered the mirror with a deafening crash, the glass exploding outward in a cascade of glinting shards. As the fragments fell to the floor, I felt a surge of energy, like a wave of cold air rushing past me, a collective sigh of release. In the broken shards scattered around me, I saw faces, dozens of them, each one finally free, their expressions no longer twisted in pain. I watched as they faded, their forms dissipating into the air, leaving only silence in their wake. The weight of generations lifted from me in that moment, a strange mixture of sorrow and relief filling my chest. I knew I had broken the pact, undone the legacy, but I felt no regret. The souls were free, and for the first time, so was I. The morning after I shattered the mirror, the house was different. The oppressive weight that had seemed to hang over every room was gone, replaced by a lightness I'd never felt here before. The silence was still there, but it was peaceful, no longer filled with shadows and whispers. I wandered through the house, taking in the rooms one last time. Everything looked the same, yet I felt like I was seeing it through new eyes. The faces that had haunted the mirror were gone, their presence lifted, and I could finally breathe. In the bedroom, I stood over the broken shards of the mirror, each fragment catching the morning light. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, a sense of loss for the family legacy that I'd left in ruins. My great-grandfather had seen this pact as something sacred, a tradition that had guaranteed prosperity for generations. But the price had been too high, and I couldn't live with it. Kneeling down, I picked up one of the shards, the glass cool and sharp in my hand. I looked at my reflection in the fragment, a single eye staring back at me with a clarity I hadn't seen before. It was just me. No shadows, no faces. Just me, free of the past. I left the broken mirror where it was, a symbol of the legacy I'd chosen to leave behind. As I walked through the house one last time, I felt a deep peace settle over me. I was no longer bound to this place, to the pact or the lives it had taken. I was free. Outside, the sun had risen high, casting the house in a warm, golden light. I took one final look at the property, the house that had held so many secrets, and felt a sense of closure. The house had lost its power over me. Whatever darkness had lingered here was finally gone, laid to rest with the souls that had once haunted it. With a deep breath, I turned and walked away, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet marking the beginning of a new path. I didn't know where I'd go or what I'd do next, but I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer the keeper of secrets, no longer bound by a reflection that wasn't truly mine. The face in the mirror was gone, and for the first time in my life, I felt whole.